What's up everybody and welcome back. So I know it's been about a month or so since the last one, but things have been quite busy trying to put an album out on my whole music side of life. So yeah, that's been quite crazy, but going out to a few locations as well, shooting. And I've been grabbing a few interesting shots and sort of been working with some other people trying to improve their photography skills too. So I thought it'd be a good idea today to try and take this time to talk over one really important aspect about taking photos, and that is composition. Now, controversially, whenever I take anybody out and so we're going out and just into town or sort of into a city and we're just practicing shooting some photos, the first thing I kind of say to them is put your camera back in your bag. Now, that's not to say don't bring your camera at all, and you never want you to be in a situation where you actually have that perfect shot in front of you and you don't have your camera with you. But shooting on your DSLR can come with some challenges, and that's you're trying to practice a whole load of things at once to get a great photo. You're trying to practice your composition, you're trying to practice your exposure, you've got all the settings to mess around with. All of these things can get quite confusing. And what I do is I take a page out of my teaching book when it comes to playing piano. So whenever I teach piano, we've got two hands and we've got to learn our left hand and we've got to learn our right hand. Now the problem with that is the brain doesn't like to do both at the same time, so you've got multiple things to think about. By learning one of the hands first, you can master it and then introduce another thing on top. The same goes for photography here. When you're out and about with your DSLR and you're walking around, you're trying to capture photos, you're trying to do everything at once, and that can become really hard to practice. So to just practice the composition, I generally tell people when they're out and about with me, let's put the cameras away into our bags and let's pick out one of these. Now, this is probably the most realistic iPhone on YouTube at the minute, mostly because it's in a case. I always get really nervous when people show me their phones and they're not in a case. The reason for this is when you take out your cameras on your iPhones, they're pretty damn good. You've got a really good camera in your pocket here, but there's a few things that's going to really help you practice your composition, which you can then take and replicate onto your cameras. When you feel comfortable with that, then that gives you the chance to focus a little bit more on your settings. So case in point, I've got an example of a photo here for you of what I generally see people taking when they're taking the photos, which is usually the old hold in front, hip firing, looking down at the camera type thing, subject in the center. Then I've got an example here for you of what I want people to try and achieve with the composition. So let's have a talk about a couple of the things that have gone wrong in the first photo. And then let's have a look at the second photo and see how we can achieve those results just using our smartphone. Remember, all these techniques are things that you would look out for in any camera. Just I find when you're using your smartphone, it's very, very easy. It's maneuverability. So when you can see shots, you can also be a lot less intrusive as well. And it gets you practicing almost if you're out in the city, not walking around with a big camera. But people are generally used to walking around and taking photos with a smartphone. So they don't tend to second guess. It also helps build your confidence a bit. So the main benefits of shooting with a smartphone out and about is that you don't have to worry about your settings. You can focus on the composition. It's more maneuverable as well. And also it gets you to understand focal lengths a little bit more by the fact that you can quickly switch between 3 different focal lengths, and it restricts you in some sense to understand how far away from your subject you might be or what sort of results you could achieve at those focal lengths. So there's some really good benefits to why you should be putting your camera in your bag and just focusing on this. But don't leave your camera at home, because if you do find that perfect composition, get the camera out the bag, set it up, take your time. So let's have a look at these photos we've got here then. Let's go with the classic one that I see everybody take. First off, yes, well, she doesn't look very happy, first of all. It's probably because it's a bad photo. But the first thing that I notice is, apart from it being a bit tilted, we can fix that anyway in post, is that the subject just feels a little bit far away to me. So whilst they are in the center, they're not quite smack in the center and they're a little bit off down, and they just feel small, they just feel lost. This whole image feels really flat as well. So everything's sort of in focus. I look at the background here, at the building, I look at the subject, I look at the wall. Yeah, everything's very sharp, it's very in focus. We've also got an overcast sky going on, so it's this boring, empty white space at top. But there's some really interesting things that we could do with this to improve it. So the first compositional technique you should try to master is the rule of thirds. And this can be achieved in your phone as well by just going down into your settings and turning on grid. This will actually lay those rule of thirds sort of over the top, and it will help you, instead of having to picture it in the moment, you can line the lines up with what's in front of you on your composition. So simply by taking our subject in this photo away from the middle, we've zoomed in on her, got her to really fill in quite a lot of that space in the photo there, so we know that the eye is drawn to here. This is where we want the eye to be focused. Everything else is trying to lead us into this area. So if we take our grid over the top and lay it, you can see that with the rule of thirds, we've got that line kind of passing right the way down through the eye. Now, eyes are a great place to try and line these up with. It's where our eyes naturally will lock. They will look at each other's eyes here. So lining that rule of thirds grid right the way through there. It doesn't have to be exact on the point. You can see I haven't got the point there, but it's a little bit more down towards where the lips are. But I'm being sure to place my subject rather in the center, just slightly off-centered on those thirds, and I'm reserving that left side a bit more for the background. The second compositional tool that we can use here then is leading lines. And now I'm a really big fan of leading lines. I think they're great for trying to frame images. You can find a lot of leading lines in architecture type photos, but you can also find a lot in nature, things like paths, tree trunks. As everywhere you look, you can generally always find a leading line. So I try to incorporate them wherever I can. And immediately going back to this first photo that was taken, I can see a couple of leading lines. So I can see one coming up the side here, but that doesn't really take me anywhere. The ones that I notice is that the subject is actually perfectly kind of positioned between two leading lines that are forming a really nice perspective into the distance here. So in particular, this one that passes from the concrete over ahead and into the gate, and likewise from the bottom. But I like this one from the gate, and we want the focus to be a little bit higher. So we saw in the last photo, in order to zoom in on the subject, we cut off the legs a bit. I don't mind doing that as long as you've got the focus where it needs to be, and I feel like we do with that rule of thirds. So if we go back into our other photo now and we draw those leading lines in, we can see that it passes nicely from the concrete block over our subject, and then that leads you away from the subject into the background there. You could argue we've got the leading lines as well from the physical gate, but if we lay our rule of thirds back over the top of this, you'll see that those gate lines are kind of matching up with that third as well. So composition, there's loads of different tricks, there's loads of different techniques we can use. You don't have to cram every one of them into a photo, but the more you can follow these and use them as guidelines, the better your image is going to get, and the more consistently better your images are going to turn out as. Now you imagine you're out there walking around with your big camera, you're trying to fiddle around with the settings as well. You don't get as much time to focus on this composition, especially if the shots you're trying to take are very quick and in the moment. This is why I recommend when you're trying to practice composition, don't do anything like landscape. Don't just go out there where you can sit down and line it up for hours. That's probably good when you're first starting. Go into a city, try a bit of street photography. Go to a gig, try some live music photography. Try and shoot something where in the moment you have to almost see these things on screen and then they're gone. That's going to get you practicing seeing them a little bit more, trying to capture them, waiting for those moments to come up. And the final one that you can do with these phones then is play around with the portrait mode. Now I see portrait mode used wrong so many times. I've been sent quite a lot of photos before where one person's like really in focus and sharp and the other one's blurred. It's been caught in the portrait mode. It's been caught in the background. Now, portrait mode is great though because it allows us to create more depth within our image. So going back to this first one, a big problem we had with this is it's very flat. So when I look at this, I can see the background clearly, I can see the building, I can see the details in the subject, I can see everything. But also that white sky is just so distracting. Now I could replace it, or if we go back to our other photo, I try and reduce that sky as much as possible, but we can see here by using the portrait mode and not having that f-stop like right the way down like it tries to default it as, you can alter that f-stop on your iPhone or your smartphone there. Bring in a little bit more of around the concrete that we can see, but the entire background of the building is gone. So another rookie error I see is just racking portrait mode on and taking the photo with the settings that are on portrait mode. Make sure you tweak them, create the depth that you want in the image. So now when we put these two side by side, we go from something that just looks a little bit more amateurish to something that looks more professional. And all we're doing here is using two compositional techniques and creating a little bit of depth. And I love that you can take these kind of photos with smartphone. Would I trade it for my DSLR? No, not a chance, because I can get way more cooler shots, a lot more detail. There's just something about the images that come out of there. But I myself practice what I preach, and I do make sure I go out regularly and I just actually practice my own composition. Usually when I go to a location for the first time, I'm actually looking through one of these rather than my camera. Again, it's just more maneuverable. I can quickly go around, see where might be a good place to set up a tripod or a shot. So we take our photo, whack one of my presets over the top, and suddenly we got this really nice moody style, and just fix some of those bluish tinge lighting issues that were on there. And it's ready to go. So please do like and subscribe, comment. It really does help the algorithm. Now we're close to those sort of first 1,000 subscribers there. That has been the milestone I set initially. Once I reach that, it's going to be the 10,000s, the next one. So all of your support is just so welcomed, and thank you for watching all the videos so far. I'm slowly getting back into the social media side. It's an area which I've been terrible with. YouTube is usually the only one that I play around with myself and I like. But I will get back into the Instagram game and sort of leave the handle below there if you want to follow along. For me, it's not really about building a following that platform. It's just a place for me to start dumping some photos, even if they don't gain any traction and it's all about videos now. It's just a place for me to dump some photos and quickly look and flick up from one place in person. But anyway, thanks again. I'll see you in the next one.